What is up, people? EJ Stewart, Shamari Stewart, Kendall Stewart, all here talking X-Men 97. We're talking episode 4 today, Motendo, Life Death Part 1. A different way we've seen X-Men do episodes. I mean, this was almost like a episode of like Hey Arnold or Cat Dog, where you kind of had a one half of an episode doing the first half of the 30-minute episode, and the second half of the episode, totally different story. Continuing in the second part of this, so we saw the split titles last week, so we knew something unique was going to be different about this because there were two titles for two different storylines. Of course, we knew Light Death would be a Storm story with Forge. We now know the Motendo story, which went in the direction that I don't think any of us expected to go when we started watching it. So excited to hear what my guys got to say. Again, joining me are Shamari and Kendall here from New Generation Media. Sham, I'll ask you first, right off the top here. What did you make of how they structured these episodes? Again, something we had not quite seen before, where they did the split episodes.
I liked it. And I feel like it kind of saves time. I prefer this to us getting a full Motendo episode and then a full Life Death Part 1 episode. Um, I feel like if either of those two segments was 30 minutes, I would have felt like it didn't need to be 30 minutes. Um, so, so I was cool with it. Yeah, I thought it was cool.
So Shamar, you so surprised. Shamar said that he actually preferred this method because again, it's not how we've seen X-Men 97 or the X-Men animated series do shows in the past. Kind of off top here, what did you make of how they split up these two episodes into and put them in, combined them into one? Especially considering the
Well,
second part of the episode is a part one of another episode, so there's like kind of a lot happening with this.
yeah, I'm like 50% with Shamari. I'd say I'm of the mindset that I think the I disagree in the sense that I think that that the show's already we've already talked about the first couple episodes have been a little rushed, and so when you then condense it even further, you get even less story, obviously, and so it's just these were like speed ran stories, which obviously we watched plenty of shows, like you mentioned, plenty of cartoons from back in the day, plenty of cartoons even now, shows like
Yep.
Regular Show and a show like even like Teen Titans Go, like those shows are in that 12-minute to 15-minute format, and you can tell good stories in that. But where I will agree with Shamari is I don't know if these episodes needed to be full length. I agree that I don't really know if there was much more there. Now again, we are like you said, we are getting a part two to the life death story, and so yes, there is technically more there, but maybe it's better that it is split. And I guess next week, as far as we know, is not going to be the part two, but the week after, and so maybe it's better that it is split into sort of an episode and then an episode and a half, essentially an episode and a half is split between half an episode and then a full episode. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and we'll talk more about it. But the formatting was interesting, though. Again, I wasn't expecting it, and I think it led to some of the it led to even more of a kind of a rushed kind of setting for these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm mixed on it. I will say this: I think the execution, it was neat. And I don't mean that to sound like cheesy or sound like I'm kind of like patting like, oh, like a little cute little story, like, but it was kind of neat. Like, again, like I can't think of a superhero show. The only one I can think of really was Justice League Action that did episodes like this, where you kind of did these short episodes. We
Yeah,
split
like I said, Teen
two.
Titans
They
Go.
might. Yeah, I don't watch Teen Titans Go, but
Yeah, that doesn't count.
that makes sense. That Teen Titans Go with something like that. And that's very different than this. And Justice League Action is not as serious either, but it's closer to this for sure than what Teen Titans Go is doing. That is more like a SpongeBob episode or a Rocket Power episode or a Hey Arnold episode or a Rugrats episode. So I never seen this, but for a team like the X Men, where you do have multiple characters, that you're trying to develop, I can see why this was useful. I think it actually was very useful for Jubilee. I thought the Motendo story, that's a story that as a full episode, maybe you feel like, oh man, you're really taking me out of like some of the things we've been building up to. What's going on with Jean? Where's Charles? Of course, still Magneto leading the X-Men. There's so much that's happening that we don't really get played out. But if we, in theory, continue to just pull on those story threads and continue that story, other characters are going to be shortchanged. It's just inevitable. So, how do you give someone like Jubilee true character development and not have her feel like she's lost in the shuffle? And also Roberto as well, Sunspot as well gets a lot of character development as well here. Like, how do you do that while also not taking so much away from some of the more important story you have, splitting it into a kind of a short little fun story that can just be kind of its own thing, is the best way to do it. And I think it really worked well for Jubilee's story. I think for Storm's story, I'm still missing, I think, some things with it. I think the intro to the episode, I think for me didn't. I don't know if it really helped that much, to be honest. So the intro, those credits, of course, there's always those Easter eggs that come in, which is now again becoming one of my favorite parts of watching this show, is seeing what different scenes they put into the intro that aren't the same scene. It seems like we're almost always gonna see the scene of like Roberto on the fence, kind of like Jean, and then Bishop spinning with the mullet still. Like those, I think we're gonna see all the time. Maybe some of the Phoenix stuff we'll see every time. But then there were some new shots. One was Lilandra and Charles, that I believe was a shot from an older scene. But then there was one, of course, of Jubilee as well, fighting what's her name, who we see in this episode, as well. Yes, fighting Mojo as well. Like, so I feel like the intro is the key one for this one was seeing Forge, and there's an X Factor episode of X-Men anime series that I gotta go back and watch, but like there's so much about Forge that was somewhat developed in the first show that I kind of wish that maybe we could have got more from that time, or at least a number of an explanation from that time, as opposed to like that shot and then some of the explanation we have in this, but it's still a little short-sighted. I feel like the life death angle needed a full episode. Would it have been the most exciting, fun episode given what we saw in this episode? I don't know. That part of this episode was good. It felt short. That part felt short. Like Jubilee to me felt like the Motendo story felt like, yeah, that's a 15-minute story that they told extremely well, and it was great. The life death story has so much depth, and there are so many questions I have still about, why Storm, how did he find Storm? I will say this, I know last week I kind of banged on that a little bit. The whole UN thing was on like television, I think, and Magneto Taylor. So in theory, he could have watched on television Storm get shot and say, I gotta help this person. But how did she know she's in Dallas? There's just a lot of stuff that I feel like are leaps that you're making the audience take that I think, to be honest, this is a show that, yes, kids are going to watch it, but this is a show for adults, because that's the target audience, is the nostalgia you're trying to grab from it. So knowing that we have this kind of intelligence, I still feel like there are leaps they're making us make, that they're just, or rather they're just story threads. They're just not really connecting with Storm and Forge, that I think is making me kind of like disconnected from this, which is a shame, because like that story is such an important story to Storm's, or not origin obviously, but her character and what we've seen from her throughout the comics. I don't know if this was the vessel I would have used to do this. I get why doing a whole life death story in one episode feels like you're just taking yourself completely away from the team and what's going on, and like I get it. I just don't know if it's been so beneficial to the Forge Storm story that I've seen.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not as familiar with the comics, so I can't really speak to that. Um, I'm enjoying the story so far. Um, well, I don't enjoy that. Of course, that Storm lost her powers. I already spoke to that in one of our recaps. But I'm glad that they're like kind of giving this story its shine. And they're it's gonna become something that we go back to. So I mean, I haven't minded Forge's kind of presence at all. I'm curious to see how Storm gets her powers back. Um, and I'm glad they're taking their time. Like if I feel like if he had showed up and then she would have gotten better like immediately in this episode, I'd have been
Yeah.
like, that's a little that would have been a little fast and seemed a little pointless to even take away her abilities. But I think with them kind of taking their time with it, and we may get some of those answers in terms of like how he found her and stuff because there are still questions.
Yeah.
I think even kind of Storm acknowledges that there's questions, like she has questions. So I think we may still get those answers, but so far I would say I'm not hating the story. I'm uh, eager to see how this progresses, and looking forward to seeing, hopefully seeing Storm get her powers back.
Let's talk about these episodes, and let's start with Motendo because let's go in order of what we saw. Motendo was fun, and Motendo was creative. Like I think they deserve a lot of props for the Motendo episode. Um, Again, that's an episode that I feel like if that had been an X-Men animated series and that was a 30-minute episode, I would say this is fine, but man, that was kind of like a real kind of filler episode. Like, I don't know if I needed that, even if we liked seeing Jubilee do some stuff for a little while. But like, uh, I think this is another example of why doing the show in 2024 comes with benefits. Um, Obviously, the story of Mojo deciding to I guess reboot his show as a TV show / video game that he then plucks Jubilee from and Roberto from to his audience and makes it essentially there are a lot of things similar to the X-Men arcade game that is of course famous, so a lot of nods to that, nods to the show of course, as Jubilee is playing missions and playing things from certain things that happen in the show. Also playing to the fact that, as they talk about from the very beginning of this episode, when she asks what she wants to do, she wants to go to the arcade. Of course, that's where we saw Jubilee in the first episode of this show. So definitely very much a full circle moment here. Jubilee turns 18 on her birthday. The 8-bit stuff they did, some of the art stuff they did was truly phenomenal. And I've seen some people not as impressed with the animation. I actually think the animation has been great. I think sometimes the dialogue hasn't. If it's something to bang, I'd say maybe sometimes the dialogue felt a little wooden. But I think I've had no problem with the animation. But I thought this was an example where I thought the animation really shined in these scenes where she was going through these different levels. There are some levels where she was totally herself. Some levels that were full 8-bit. There were some scenes where she was like kind of herself, but then some of the background was 8-bit, or some of her movements were like kind of like glitchy to like a video game, like, even though she was in her own. I mean, there was so much cool stuff happening with that. Like, this to me was like a thing to like, wow, the animators really did their thing with this. And I thought they made me interested in Jubilee. Like, Jubilee's a fun character. I think Jubilee I think if you're a real X-Men fan, you gotta love Jubilee. I think if you're like, I think you're a casual if you have anything negative to say about Jubilee. I think no one is expecting her to be like the best X-Man or the most powerful, but I think she's just a fun character. She's a big part of the team. She's like the heart. In some ways, she's kind of like the heart and soul. She's like a glue. She's like a glue guy on a basketball team. Like they're not averaging 30 points, but like you need Josh Hart out there. You need certain people on the squad just to help everybody else with morale and just the vibe. So I thought this was a really nice story, and I think it did a very important thing as well when we see the beta version of Jubilee. And again, you want to talk about really taking these characters, some that maybe you say, oh, not as cool, not as powerful, and sometimes thinking of them as an afterthought. Like here, another great example of them saying, hey, Jubilee has these powers. Like, how can we showcase them in a way that maybe we didn't see in the show before, and maybe we haven't seen quite as much in the comics. And seeing the older version of Jubilee, how she was able to manipulate the fireworks to have her moving around like she was almost on like roller skates as she was fighting Mojo in that last scene. Really cool stuff. So I dug Motendo. Definitely a kind of a filler side story. Definitely a side mission thing. But I think there was so much love letter stuff for X-Men fans, whether you are a fan of the X-Men arcade game, a fan of this show, or X-Men period, or definitely a fan of Jubilee. I think there was plenty of stuff to sink your teeth into. Kendall, how'd you feel about the first half of this episode of Motendo?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think, once you sort of, step back and realize that this isn't going to be as uh, serious as the first 2 or 3 episodes that we've gotten, and that this is going to be more of a, like you said, more of a filler, more lower stakes kind of fun story. I think that it plays really well. I think Jubilee's character. I mean, you're right when you talk about Jubilee. I mean, that's a character that, in large part because of the Fox X Men movies, has been sort of benched in a lot of X Men larger media because they didn't feature her in those movies, and so then subsequent cartoons and other stories decided we're not going to feature Jubilee either because
Yeah.
it's not brand synergy, doesn't make sense, and she's kind of been forgotten, so to speak. But this show did a really good job of bringing her back and giving her a feature in this episode. And I mean, I agree. Yeah, I think it was a good episode. Like you said, I think um, the nature of it is a little fillery, but I mean, plenty of shows, especially from that era, had filler type episodes that weren't super deep. Like it's funny because like the life death story feels more feels almost more like a Batman animated series kind of like you know kind of off the beaten path, slow paced, not a whole lot of action or anything like that.
Yeah.
And we'll get more of that as it goes on, but at least that first half of it was very slow paced, but felt like they were able to balance it out with the very vibrant, colorful, action packed Motendo episode that was moving at a million miles per hour. So it was a nice balance in that regard. Um, and I mean I enjoyed it. I think you know like you said, one of the criticisms I had last week was I thought, you know, how are they going to balance all these characters and give all these characters storylines and plots and character development? And Jubilee was obviously one of the characters I mentioned, and this is how you do it. If you if you
Yeah.
can create
Exactly.
create side plots and side quests for these characters to go on and things of that nature to give them their feature.
Yeah, and you play a little bit on the history with Mojo, who was in the first animated series as well. So as the character's coming back, they play on the fact that hey man, like you look a lot thinner now. Like they like again this show is a student of the game and a student of the original, which makes episodes like that work so well. Like I think if they half-assed it and didn't have some of the attention to detail on those episodes, I think that this would have not worked quite as well. But I think that went a long way. Shem, how did you feel about Motendo, the first half of this two-parter of a 30-minute episode of the X-Men?
I thought it was solid. Yeah, I mean, again, hats off to the team behind the show. This is an episode that I could have easily seen myself very much not liking, or at least as part of the episode, at least not liking, being like, why am I getting this? Why are there so much
Yeah.
focus on Jubilee? But I ended up really liking it. So a lot of even within this like side story or mini story, there was a lot of nostalgia with the Motendo console, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's
Yeah.
very very 90s, very 80s 90s console, and and then this like you said, like the 8-bit animation, and it even kind of felt like the older like specials, like almost like the cyber chase and like going through like the digital world and stuff. And I'm like, this is like something out of the 90s or 2000s, like some kind of animated special that I would have seen
Yeah,
for
it
some.
reminded me of a little bit of two things. One was the Channel Chasers episode of Fairly Odd Parents,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
also the episode with Control Freak and Teen Titans, similar in
Yes,
that regard as well.
Yep.
yes, and I think was it the Scooby Doo Cyber Chase? Was that like a movie, like one of the
Uh,
animated movies with the blue
yeah,
guy?
I think that's what it was. I mean, no, Cyber Chase was a show, but it was Cyber something, I
Yeah,
think, right?
yeah. I know Cyber Chase was his
I
own
think I
show.
think that was
Then I,
also called Cyber Chase. Yeah,
yeah, but yeah,
yeah,
but yeah, you're right. It reminded me of all of those. Um, so yeah, it was a very nostalgia heavy episode. And then again, it was Jubilee in this episode, and even kind of reminded you throughout the whole show, was just so endearing. Was kind of very much a representation of, because the X-Men just seem so larger than life a lot of the times. They're so used to being heroes, and Jubilee
Yeah,
is like
for sure.
one of the few like normal people that's just like has powers and is like trying to get used to having them and learning how to be a hero as opposed to just being a normal teenager.
Yeah.
So it was very good seeing her and Roberto's relationship grow as well, and seeing her powers get better, and the animation continues to impress me. So I actually enjoyed it, even though I guess you could call it a quote unquote filler. I did enjoy this episode, honestly.
Sham, I think you really summed up extremely well why Jubilee is important, because she is the one that feels like the connection between us and the rest of the team. Like Jubilee feels like if any of us became an X-Man, we would probably be Jubilee. Like we want to go to the arcade. We probably walk around wearing sunglasses. Like we probably be like kind of goofy. Like we would be them. And I think you're right. Like everybody on the team takes themselves extremely seriously. Like literally everybody, even the people you think are lighthearted, like Gambit and Wolverine, take themselves extremely seriously. So Jubilee is the one who doesn't, and she doesn't take anyone on the team seriously. As we note, when she asks, Magneto if they can go to the arcade, she then mocks him in his voice, which was really funny, talking about the reason why he wouldn't go to the arcade. Now it was so beneath him being the master of magnetism, which was one of my favorite lines of this episode, both episodes. It was her doing that impression of the stuffy Magneto denying her ability to go to the arcade. Really funny stuff. Like that would be us. That would be anybody. So I think you hit the nail on the head on why Jubilee works as a character, why she's important, and why this episode was important. Now, we mentioned the growth of Roberto. You know, obviously there's a romantic angle to this that we have been seen being fruiting slipped there, floated for the last several episodes. Here we kind of see it full tilt as they kiss at the end. But we see Roberto finally using his powers in this situation. It's funny kind of hearing him when she's like, "Why would you use your powers?" He's like, "Oh, I could be seen on TV." Like he's so paranoid and he's so like full of himself. Like the fact that he thinks he's someone that's famous enough to be on TV, and that like that's how he gets spotted as a mutant. Says a lot about Roberto. I've actually enjoyed Roberto. I think he's been written extremely well. I feel like he's the kind of, I don't think we've really seen a character like him on the X-Men the animated series, or no, this is a new show. Like a character who like is a mutant but doesn't really want to be, but also like has all the resources to like not have to deal with this or not think that this is his problem. Like it's an interesting blend that we quite haven't seen. Like maybe Angel was at a little bit, but Angel was like tortured. Like Roberto's not tortured. He's seems very at peace with his decision to like not be, at least outwardly. Of course, we see these scenes where we know he's struggling more than maybe he puts on. But like Angel seemed extremely tortured by his existence before he even turns into Archangel when we see him in the show. So this is a kind of a different character. Of course, he's a little younger than Angel as well, so that adds a different dynamic as well. Kendall, how did you feel about Roberto's insert in this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Where you're like you said, it's kind of a unique archetype in X Men, and the big difference between him and Angel as well is that Angel couldn't obviously hide as
Of
easily
course.
as Roberto could in terms of his power set, and so that again allows him to blend in, so to speak. And that's always that's always a big talking point with the X-Men in general. Whose powers can be hidden and whose can't. And
Yeah,
obviously, in this show, most of them that are on the team can. That's kind of separated between them and the Morlocks. But yeah, I mean, obviously, with him trying to kind of conceal his identity, so to speak, that's a big part of it. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, he's been an interesting character because he's the one inclusion that is a completely kind of new character for them to introduce, and um, I think they've done a good job. I'm curious to see where we kind of end off this season with him and his character. Is he a full time member of the X Men at that point? I would assume so, but I don't know. We'll see. This show continues to sort of the thing that's interesting about this show between the last episode and then even this episode to a degree is we continue to sort of um, operate as if there's a lot that has happened in between like the last two shows, and almost like we're living in a world, and some of it didn't happen only in the gap you would assume, but maybe just stuff that happened off screen while the other show was going on. But like it's like we talked about last week with like Magic wearing a New Mutants costume, right? And like what are the New Mutants a thing? Is that something that'll show up? And I only reference that just because I'm wondering again, where does Roberto's character wind up, and is he
yeah,
somebody that maybe winds up with the New Mutants at some point? Is he
yeah.
somebody that winds up with the X-Men? Like, are the New Mutants a thing? I don't know. They haven't really delved into that. But somehow Morph knows about all this stuff because he keeps turning into these different characters.
Right, Morph has seen at least seen these people, and he's probably engaged them. You think he had to engage them to know their power set so well. So we know that he's not just pulling these characters out of thin air. Um, though I mean, the first show, he once he transformed into Deadpool. I think periodically, like when he see Deadpool, we don't know if that ever happened, um, but yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of where Sunspot ends up landing. Is it with the team? Is he part of a different team? We've heard the rumors this week that this X-Men team will have different costumes by the end of this when it's all said and done, which I'm extremely excited about. But like, who's to say? I think that we'll probably see a big kind of status quo change once we get past this season. I think this season is going to be they're hitting a lot of nostalgia. I think they're trying to like give you some piece for like how the show ended and give you something to look forward to moving forward. I feel like once we get to like season 2, I think you're gonna see like drastic changes. I think you'll see new costumes. I think you'll see a new team. I think maybe half or some or these people won't be on the team anymore. I think there's gonna be a lot of moving parts from this that I think we'll have to follow for sure. But I want to shift to Lifedeath again. So, Lifedeath now we see Storm and Forge are living together, kind of in the wilderness. In Forge, I thought a really cool explaining. I think this is probably one of the best ways I've ever seen. I don't say ever, but I think it was a great way of how they explained what Forge's powers are and what they can do. How he described himself and his abilities to create things mechanically. And I liked how, especially because of the foreshadowing of what he talks about later in terms of him, kind of helping with the beginning of the development of the collars that were put on, the mutants, which we know was then that power was harnessed and shoot Storm with that executioner shot that he took. I liked kind of how even though it's his gift, he kind of speaks of it almost as a curse, and it's actually up to Storm to say, like, you say whatever, like, this is a genius, like, what you're describing to me. He doesn't even see it that way himself. So I liked how they described Forge's powers here. I think just from a character model standpoint, he looks like a freaking like supermodel. Like, he just like looks very handsome man. Like, they definitely knew what they were doing in terms of putting these two together. But I think, again, for me, the one thing that I think is still missing are just beats, I feel like. Like, I can't get an idea of how long this has been. I get the impression this has been kind of long. But it's still, I think honestly, I feel like this is a show. I think something that like Young Justice did extremely well was just putting the date of when things are happening. Um, that's a simple way of doing it without having the cheesy. Well, it was 2 months ago when he landed on my door. Like, but even that I would actually accept. I feel like because there are aspects of the show where like he's there. There's at the end he says he's fallen in love with her. He does make a machine that doesn't work, but I assume it's not a machine he could have made in a day or like a week. Like I don't have a lot of time for like how long the relationship has been built, and I just feel like the moments that they presented to us were more personal and they were well done. The dialogue's good, the acting is good, the voice acting is good, and the animation is great. It looks beautiful, especially when they're on the horseback, when they're in the mountains. Like it looks awesome. But like I almost feel like they're giving me all sizzle and still no steak. There's just some storyline aspects of it. I feel like I need to kind of get a better handle of why does he think he can recreate her powers. Like it's just I don't know. Am I off on this, Sham, or did you feel differently about how the Forge insertion here in the life death story angle of this episode came together?
I mean, I didn't mind what they were doing, though. I do think it felt to me very much like a comic book.
Mm,
And in a comic, we would have gotten dates and
right.
maybe some inner monologue as well that would have filled in
You
some of
might have
that.
even gotten a little like John Hickman loves doing like those little title
Yeah,
pages that kind of just explain things. Like you could have gotten some of
yeah,
that with stuff like this, for sure.
yeah. That's what it felt like to me, and I feel like we would have gotten those kind of holes like filled in. Um, but I agree with in terms of the things that you liked. I've liked the dialogue. I've liked that voice acting. I've loved the animation. Um, I like the concept, of course, of Forge being the one to kind of work on this. I agree that there definitely should have been some passage of time that would appear to be the case. Um, so yeah, I definitely think we could have done with some of that information. But overall, I've enjoyed it. I've definitely enjoyed this so far. For them telling a story like this, I think they've tried to do the most with it. I still think we're going to get more information later on. So I think with regards to um, how Ford founder and all that kind of stuff, where he came from, like why he's there, because like you said, it's very much out of nowhere. So I still think there are some answers forthcoming, but I've enjoyed this story so far.
Ken, how did you feel about how the life death story came together with Storm and Forge here? At the end of the episode, the adversary becomes the antagonist for this angle, and the adversary has close ties to Forge's story. The adversary is someone that Forge summoned from his time at in the Vietnam War, and then eventually becomes a villain for the mutants, the X-Men, and Forge himself. How did you feel about how Life Death came together? What are some of the things you thought worked well or didn't work well?
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought that imagery at the end it sort of gave me callbacks. You talk about the animation, gave me callbacks to some of the Miyazaki anime movies, Spirited Away, things of that
Yep.
nature. And just credit, obviously Studio Mir doing the animation. They do a lot of anime themselves, so it makes sense why you get a lot of those influences in this series. But yeah, I mean, I thought this episode was interesting. Like I said, it was more of a slow burn. I agree that the passage of time and just the timeline in general is a little muddied in this show, but that's a lot of superhero cartoons, a lot of cartoons in general. Um, there's a lot of shows in general. Give me, even a live action. You show like the Flash or Arrow. It's not very clear. Is it a week since the last episode? Has it been 2 weeks? Has it been a month?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes you'll wake up and it's like the next scene, or it's clearly the next day. and sometimes it's very vague. And this one, like, you don't really even know if Motendo and Lifedeath are happening, congruently, or if they're
Right.
happening, completely different points of time. They have
Yep.
nothing to do with each other. So in theory, it's very possible they have nothing. One could be happening weeks in advance or something along those lines. So
Yep.
again, that's not unusual, but like you said, when you have a show like Young Justice, where time is so important and it's so detailed, a lot of times it's easier on the viewer. If I'm supposed to take these storylines, if I'm supposed to dig into them really intently. And the MCU shows, the live action MCU shows, have done a really good job of kind of playing out the timeline, so to speak. A lot of times we have a show that has filler, it gets a little harder to do that because again the episode really a lot of times doesn't have anything to do with anything. So yeah, I mean, I thought that the Forge stuff was good. Um, I assume I don't know how much more. I mean, we're gonna get more answers, like Shamari said, just because that's established. Um, I'm at this point, I'm assuming that we're just supposed to believe that Forge uh, knew where Storm was, like, just because he built the tech, like he like for some reason, like he's been tracking, like EJ said, he's tracking the case, saw the tech being used, he knew he
Mm.
had a piece in it, and so then he became that became a priority, and maybe he's
Yeah.
been tracking,
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe
you
an
know,
obsession. An obsession. Maybe that's a good point. Actually, that's something I didn't think about.
right,
That once he saw that he was the reason, and as Storm said, like I am your key to redemption.
right,
And which was again their lines. The lines there and stuff were great. I just feel like there's a part of me that feels like I want those scenes to be earned a little more. Um, when Forrest says he loves Storm, like I was like, slap that dude. Like, what is he talking about? Like, I've seen you for literally 15 minutes. Like, how did we get to this point? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's tough because when you're doing a show that's about a team, and obviously Storm is one of the most important members of the team, but you're still trying to show everybody some love. It's hard to get all of it in. So I understand to a certain degree. It's interesting that this is a part one of the life death story. There's going to be an episode in between. Next week is Remember It, and then life death part two is after that, and that's a full episode. So essentially, life death is like a episode and a half. So what's that? I guess 45 minutes of an episode. There's a part of me that wonders why you couldn't just make this a 45-minute episode, like just make life death like its own thing. Uh, but it seems like a lot of the stuff leading up to the confrontation with the adversary is kind of being put away for the sake of like getting to this stuff with the adversary. Um,
it, it, I was
yeah,
just gonna say, it's funny when you talk about the formatting, like, and them doing this episode in halves and then another one that's full. It almost, I think, shows you the lack of constraints that they have now making the show. You talk about it being in the future, now making the show on a streaming service. Like, I don't know if you would have been able to do something like this back in the day, where you're confined to just telling a certain amount of, you get an X amount of episode order, this amount of time. Maybe you could have done something like this, but
yep,
I don't know if they would have let them. But now you're making the show on Disney Plus, and you kind of have more autonomy. So, like you said, maybe you could have turned this into a movie, so to speak, or a mini
right.
movie, or a 45-minute episode, if need be. But I think they really are trying to keep with the nostalgia and keep the formatting to 30 minutes.
Yeah, they try to do the best of both worlds. Because again, they gave us something unique here, where we had half an episode that went into this. The finale is 3 episodes. Like, it's this 3 episodes in 3 separate weeks. Um, Tolerance's is Extinction are episodes 8, 9, and 10, part 1, 2, and 3. So I mean, that's never happened before. Like they've done episodes like the Dark Phoenix Saga, where there are episodes that are congruent. What's the word? Congruent? I don't know. I can't get the word right.
Yeah.
Congruent. Thank you.
Yeah.
But not in a finale. They've done it like that. So and those episodes had names individually, I believe, but they were within a saga. So they're doing some things. Like I think they're trying to kind of give us some of the best of both worlds while trying to keep to that 30-minute episodic feel, while also understanding that, like, in order to tell these stories in 10 episodes, they're gonna have to get creative. So they're trying to give us some of that. Sham, in terms of where the story is headed moving forward, again, we get introduced to the adversary in this. This is a Forge creation, a Forge villain. I think that if you want to talk about, Kendall made the comments earlier, like, you want to talk about terrifying, horror, like, all those things, like, they hit it with that. Like, I mean, the adversary looks scary as F in this episode. So, episode 6, which comes out April 17th, so that's we got a couple weeks from now. I'm like, man, I'm looking forward to it, but not in a good way. I feel like this is going to be extremely dark, and seeing Storm and Forge break through this is going to be great, but it's going to come with some crazy moments. How do you feel about the adversary, the look, and what you are looking forward to moving forward?
I like the look, like you said, EJ, very menacing. Yeah, not too much to say about him. I mean, I just got to, I'm open to see how it goes.
Yeah.
Looks like an X-Men villain. I'm eager to see how this plays out. Of course, Storm doesn't even have her powers, so very curious to see what happens. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm open. It'll be interesting. It's interesting that it's a full episode. Again, I'm not familiar with the comic, so you know, I'm not. I guess you could say I haven't been spoiled in terms of what may happen, but
Right, what's supposed to
you
happen?
know, yeah, but whatever is going to happen, I guess it's going to take a full episode. So I'm looking forward to seeing. I'm sure it'll have some action involved. I would imagine the other X-Men may get involved, or at least some of the other X-Men may get involved as well. Um, of course, we're still waiting for Charles to come back. I foresee him coming back at some point. So I don't know. I don't know how this is all going to play out, but I'm excited to see it.
Yeah.
I was going to say there was a part of me that wondered if the adversary was whatchamacallit?
Shadow King?
Shadow King. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm assuming it's not, but I also
No,
wonder
no,
if
no,
that
it's
also
not.
may be a twist. I do wonder if they end up kind of, if it might be him in disguise role,
Yeah.
they might be playing
Yeah.
a twist.
Yeah, because Shadow King is very important. The Storm story. I think a lot of people probably watch this thinking that this may be who we're talking about, but adversary is connected to Storm and Ford, so I don't think they'll pull the rug in that regard. But I think a lot of people sure watch this and who didn't know Life Story know a lot about Ford being like, oh crap, is this a Shadow King? But yeah,
The
sorry, go ahead, Kento.
No, I was just gonna say the voice actor that plays Cyclops had had an interesting comment last week where he said that said that there's going to be a major twist in this series that threw him for a loop and through reading the script, and he's excited for people to see it. I don't know what it is because so far a lot of the series has played out in the comics, and a lot of these things have been things that have been foreshadowed or things that we kind of can expect and see coming. So I'm wondering what's going to be that thing that happens, that Roy Harper Red Arrow moment where we're just like, that was that's not a comic.
Yeah, well, we literally already had that with Jean and Madeline Pryor. If I had to
we
guess,
expected that one.
Well, we did once we saw the first episode. I don't think we expected it from jump. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say there was like, today's Funko Pop culture, Lego Lego culture. People are like, wait, Madeline Pryor toy, stuff like that.
Right. So, That is where I did a good job of avoiding spoilers, so I didn't have to worry so much about something like that. If I had to guess, especially since it's the voice actor that's playing Cyclops. And I pay attention to everything, and I'm paying attention to those opens. One of the shots they showed this week was Emma Frost. Let's remember the Hellfire Club. There's a scene from earlier, I think, from the Dark Phoenix saga, with from the original show. But Emma Frost it was featured prominently. I feel like we like when we went to Comic Con, they had their first kind of presentation of this at New York Comic Con a couple years ago. I think they said Emma Frost is in this season. I feel like that's something that I remember among the villains that we'll see. I wonder if an Emma Frost Cyclops thing, at least those tea leaves get laid here, especially if Jean leaves, which I think is very likely to possible to even likely, given that this is not the same Jean that went through however many years that Scott has gone through. Like maybe this is a Jean that wasn't actually married. Who knows what's happened? So that would be my initial guess, but maybe maybe that's not a big enough guess. I don't know. Um, I would love for there to be a huge kind of change to the team. I love the team that they have, but we're getting this full season, which is good, or 10 episodes, which is a full season for this in this generation. But like, I would love them to kind of switch up the team after this season. Give me Angel, give me Iceman, give me like have some people maybe take a step back or take a move on, and maybe we see them next season in an episode or two. But we see they took Bishop out of the open. Like Bishop, we saw him take young Nathan Summers into the future. He's not in the open anymore. Like I don't know if we're gonna see Bishop again in a meaningful way. Like I think that was kind of your first sign of like, hey, like maybe don't get attached to like all these characters. Like you could probably assume Wolverine will be around, and I would maybe not assume anybody else really, and maybe Cyclops, I guess. But that was something that I think that if I was looking at this, I would say maybe look for maybe major changes to the team. Maybe it's Jean. I think definitely is a prime candidate to leave. I think Gambit is a prime candidate to leave. Magneto is Magneto, so he could turn on any given day or any given hour. So I think that if you're talking about what could change drastically, I would say the team itself, I think, could change drastically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I honestly have no idea. Again, I am waiting to see how Charles is going to fit into all this. I feel like he may bring some surprises with him, maybe
Yep, for sure.
when he shows up. Um, Outside of that, I mean, who knows? Of course, you can always go, okay, is there a death that's going to happen? Who's going to die? And, we get to kind of go down that rabbit hole. Who's expendable? Who's not? Or
Yeah.
who's died in the comics? That kind of stuff. Which I mean, the comics, so much has happened. I feel like probably almost everyone. But
Yeah. I mean, since Krakoa, I think everyone has died because they could all come back to life. So Krakoa definitely made it almost everyone at this point.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, who knows? I feel like the list is endless. But I guess at the top of my list would be something involving Charles because we haven't seen it
Right. Charles is the guy that
The,
that is missing.
the guy I'm watching, I mean, no surprise. I still don't trust that Magneto guy, man. I mean, it just feels like
Oh, you think he's
feels like the obvious one, but I almost feel like it's one of those obvious ones that like is not obvious. Like it's supposed to be obvious, but they're doing a good job of making it be like, there's no way, like that's too obvious. There's no way it's gonna be Magneto, and then it's gonna be Magneto. It's gonna be like, damn, didn't see that one coming. So, I mean, that he's things have been too normal with Magneto so far. They've been too status quo, been too boring. Um, would not shock me if he goes much like the Michael Fassbender Magneto, and like it's like, all right, yeah, I'm done with this X-Men now. This is boring, and like goes back to his regular ways. Maybe brings Rogue with him as part of his journey, which could be interesting.
Yeah, Magneto's definitely a prime candidate to turn or something to be up with him that we don't see right now. I would definitely agree with that. Let's do scores for this episode. So because it was one episode, I want to do a score for the full episode. I want you guys to grade the whole episode because this is how they presented it to us. So I'll go to Kendall first. I usually go to Shan first. I'll mix it up. So Kendall, what do you give episode 4, Motendo Lifedeath Part 1 for X-Men 97?
I'll go 7.5. I thought that these were enjoyable episodes. Not the most, not the deepest in terms of or richest in terms of like storylines and story development, but um, but in their own right, both were individually solid. I think you sort of limit the potential of how great an episode can be when it's this short. That's why a lot of those superhero cartoons that are 20 something minutes are typically better than the ones that are shorter. Again, there aren't many that are shorter like that, but the ones that are um, can't really tell great stories, But obviously, shows like Justice League Unlimited, all the Bruce Timm, shows, and
Yeah.
Spectacular Spider-Man, and those types of shows, can just have just a way more space to tell deeper stories. So, um, I think that these were good for what if you're going to try and do that style in this kind of show. It's good to change it up because again, there's only 10 episodes in this season. So if you're only going to have 10 episodes and you have all these characters, how are you going to balance it all out? Well, take an episode and split it into two if you can, to allow more. Even if maybe the episode as a whole isn't spectacular, it'll fit into the season pretty well because we can go back and have a memorable Jubilee moment.
Very, very good points there. Shamari, where are you going with this in terms of a grade for episode 4 X-Men 97?
I would probably give it a 7.5 as well. Nothing negative. It's not like a negative 7.5 where my expectations were through the roof. If anything, it maybe exceeded my expectations considering what actually happened in the episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, I give it a 7.5. I enjoyed the Jubilee portion. Um, a lot of nostalgia, great animation as usual. A good opportunity to give Jubilee some shine and tell more of Roberto's story as well, expand upon him as well. So I thought it was cool. And then the Life Death Part One, I overall I enjoyed as well. I feel like they're trying to build that story out. We know what Part Two is coming, um, and I'm enjoying the story they're telling so far. So I give it a 7.5.
I'm gonna give this. I'm gonna give this a 7. So slightly below you guys, but still good. I mean, this was not. I agree. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't like unenjoyable at all. I liked these episodes. I liked the Motendo episode more. For what it was giving me, I feel like 15 minutes made sense for that, and I think it worked better in 15 minutes than Life Death did. Uh, Now Motendo was more. There was some character development. We got character development for Jubilee. We got a lot of character development for Roberto. So it wasn't like it was nothing important that happened, but it was like again very side questy, very kind of filler episode one offness with it. Um, so very enjoyable, but still a little sidetracky. Life Death is very important to the story that they're telling for the entire season. But I felt a little shortchanged. I feel like honestly, I would prefer if this was just two 30-minute episodes. Like I know right now they're doing basically a 45-minute episode, one half of an episode and one full episode. I think that there was if you're really trying to convince me that Forge is falling in love with Storm and they're creating this very intimate, very intense bond. I just feel like you should not shortchange that. Like I under any circumstances. I think Shamari makes a great point that in some ways it did feel like a comic book because with a comic, a lot of times you do have to make leaps because you just can only show so much inside these panels. But I think with animation and with dialogue and with multiple episodes, like you have an opportunity to actually slow down a little bit. Like I feel like this story is the story arc so far that I think has been maybe hurt the most by the speed of the show. The show is just a fast show. There's no breaks for it. So they're making you, again, with the Life Death story, make some leaps that I don't think they're quite earning yet. But Adversaries here, it's not good news for Storm or Forge. I'm sure it's not going to make Storm feel great that this is once again Forge's fault again, that Adversary is causing her problems. He's already mad about the collar that he helped create, so that's not going to help their relationship. But of course, we know the relationship gets, no pun intended, forged through this endeavor. So seeing how they play that out, I think they probably will end up playing pretty well. But I just wish they would give me more of these story beats. And like the best way I could describe it, if I had to compare it to anything, I feel like as the issues withstanding with this movie, I feel like, and the comic book is awesome. I feel like Batman Hush, whether you've read the comic or you've watched the movie, I think did an excellent job of showing like the Batman Catwoman relationship and like how you could see that develop and then why the betrayal at the end is so like heartbreaking. Like I feel like I wanted that. I wanted that. You know what I'm saying? I and look, that's a hour long movie, hour 20-minute movie, so like it's just time is not equal. But again, this is a character in Forge that we've seen very little from the X-Men animated series, and we know very little about. Like, we're gonna make the leap that they're gonna fall in love, and there's gonna be this very deep connection. Then I think that you need to show me a little more from that. That's how I feel about it. Really quickly, one word. I want to get out of here soon, but which episode do you guys prefer more? I know I said I prefer Motendo. Kendall, Motendo or Lifedeath?
I'll give it to Motendo. Full episode.
What about you, Sham?
Motendo as well. That was the more fun portion.
Okay. Well, that's a great place to leave it here. So I want to thank you guys for checking out this edition of the New Generation Media X-Men 97 episode review. This was episode 4, Motendo / Life Death Part 1. We've been holding on to the bargain. Every week we're doing live stream episode recaps of the episodes that drop on Wednesday on Disney+. So we'll be entering the halfway point when we get to next week. Episode 5 will be out. Remember It is that episode. Honestly, who knows where that will go? I mean, we ended on a cliffhanger with Life Death, but Life Death isn't part 2. Isn't this next episode? So
it's Jean, right?
I think it's Jean. The Jean angle was not touched at all in this episode. I don't know if I even saw Jean in this episode. During even the little bit that we had with Jubilee before she even gets into the Motendo game. So I assume it's a Jean story, and we got Mr. Sinister was pitched as the primary antagonist of the season. So it's episode 5. Like, we got to start really kind of zeroing in on how we're going to land that plane. So I assume it's a Jean story, but this show is filled with surprises. Who knows what we'll actually see. But we'll be back next Wednesday once again recapping that. So make sure you keep it locked here. Again, find us on YouTube, New Generation Media. We'll find our YouTube channel. Again, we're also streaming on X/Twitter right now on my Twitter account, EJ_Stewart, which is where you can find me on social media, EJ_Stewart, Instagram, Action EJ, also TikTok, Action EJ. You can find Shamari on Snapchat and Instagram, MCShan22, Kendall on Twitter, New Gen Ken. All right, that's going to do it for now. I want to thank you guys so much for checking us out. For Shamari, for Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.